Okay, let's address the last panel of this morning. We're going to continue addressing the issue of security. Dennis works for VeriSign, an important operator that coordinates the most important TLD, that is .com. Dennis has 40, Verizon has 40% of all the domains across the world. Verizon is one of the most popular and is the backend, the internet service provider to other TLDs across the world. And Verizon plays a key role in articulating, as it was mentioned yesterday, in articulating the root servers. Dennis, are you online already? Dennis 10, I think, will address his speech in Spanish. And Dennis is going to be speaking on security on domain name servers. Dennis, are you online? Okay, let me keep talking. Hello. Hello, Dennis, how are you? What are you right now? What part of the world are you in? In Leavenworth, Virginia, in the United States. Is it okay if we speak Spanish? Are you going to be addressed your talk in Spanish? My presentation is in English. That's a terminology that I'm more acquainted with. So if you allow me, I will do it in English. But I can take questions in Spanish or in English.
Problemas técnicos.
No, está perfecto.
Great. We are going to, probably you can speak Spanish and the presentation is going to be in English and later we can translate it.
Okay, entendí bien. Hacer la presentación en español y el material en inglés, ¿está bien? Okay.
Okay, I can do it in Spanish if you want to. And I was telling you about the role played by VeriSign in the domain name servers as the coordinator of .com and the backend of many TLDs, top-level domains, and everything that has to do with security that is coordinated by VeriSign. And I would like to thank VeriSign for supporting or co-sponsoring the South School of Internet Governance, and especially giving us the possibility to have experts just like you. Thank you very much. Pleasure. My pleasure. Let me share my screen right now. As Olga introduced myself, my name is Dennis Dan. I work for VeriSign. We are a registry operator of .com, .net, and other TLDs like .edu, .gov, etc. I would like to acknowledge your presence here, and I'm going to give a presentation on DNS abuse, which is a very hot discussion, not only in ICANN, but also out of the scope of ICANN. Let me give you an overview explaining the organigram, very graphically or illustrative. The illustrative graphic to show the diversity or the many stakeholders that we have in the internet ecosystem that ranges from the ISPs or domain name providers, the infrastructure, the many hosting companies, content servers, law enforcement agencies. And I'm going to try to do some Spanglish or speak Spanglish because there are some words in English that I don't know how to translate into Spanish. And lastly, we have the final consumers, the end users. Those end users are the individuals on the entities that file or register the domain names or those that use the website services or the hosting services. What I want you to take from here is that we have many stakeholders. Each of them plays a key role and a responsibility within the scope or the ecosystem of the internet. Let me go to the next slide.
Creo que este es al revés. Ahí está.
Yes, right here.
Entonces, déjenme expandir en roles y responsabilidades.
Let me expand on the roles and responsibilities played by our company. We have the role of mitigating and responding to the illegal and abuse of online activity. This is a discussion that has been held for years, especially in ICANN and out of the scope of ICANN. Because of this given nature that the internet ecosystem is made up of many stakeholders, not only the registrars or those that register the domain names, but also content platforms. If we analyze the circle or the cycle, and if we focus on the quadrant on top, we need to define the role and the responsibilities of service providers are very important to analyze what the key stakeholders' roles are, how to act, and how they respond to the online abuse. If we go to the next quadrant, we need to describe and to analyze the different categories. The negative threat categories, and that should be clearly defined. We're talking about content, infrastructure as well, and illegal content or harmful content that it may not be illicit in nature. When the domain name is involved in the distribution and in the market of abusive content or illicit content, or a website that has been compromised and is being hacked to launch certain attacks such as malware, phishing attacks. We need to respond to that, so knowing full well what their dimensions and the factors are. That we need to consider in order to respond. We need to identify who is the most appropriate stakeholder to respond to the threat. And we need to understand what are the technical capabilities of providers. Because when we speak of registrants and registrations, the tool is to suspend or to cancel the domain name. What does that mean? That it's not going to be available to resolve a website address or an email server, but that implies that all the services that are dependent on the domain name are not going to be available. And also is, if we want to target the content is going to be available through the IP address, the IP number. So if you would remove the domain name from the zone or the registration, it doesn't mean that the content is going to be removed from the internet. Merely we just suppress the access to that content. And in explaining why we have to respond to the abuse online, there's a key stakeholder, a key player that's becoming more relevant these days. And this is the trusted notifiers. Those are specialized entities that have focused on a subject matter expertise. They have the know-how on threats or on content that they can take action on a certain abuse report and give them with enough evidence so that the responsible party or the most appropriate player to report or to respond to this abuse report can make a decision and can act upon this threat. So these trusted notifiers are required to work on a process that can ensure the reliability, the trust, to have high quality reports with enough evidence in order to respond effectively towards these attacks. We want to prevent or to avoid false positives. And those victims or those people that are hacked by these actors can have the necessary resources to restore the domain name, to recover it, or the content has been suspended. For example, if the domain name is suspended or canceled, and it means that the registrant or the user was really the victim because of a third party exploited the vulnerability within its system and took advantage of that, we have another victim there. So we want these processes to be as transparent as possible and to have the necessary resources so those affected victims can really mitigate or alleviate and resolve that dispute. So the trusted notifiers, as they evolve, or as we evolve with the discussions and with the experts that provide these trusted notifiers or reports within the internet ecosystem, we have to see how we are going to be persistent in time, because we may find a one-to-one relation with the trusted notifiers, but as we accumulate more experience and it becomes popular with the rest of the operators, we have to see how we are going to establish a system where we don't have any redundancies of reports. Because we may talk about, or the ICANN forums acknowledge this issue, that there's no norm or standard report that can escalate these abuses, and that report eventually ends up in the hands of the right operator once it's been reported and with the information of the target. So if the systems are isolated, we have to see how we are going to maintain it in time to make this system more robust so we could have a wider involvement of all stakeholders in the system or the ecosystem. And obviously, we have to respond to the online abuse reports, and this system needs to be operated within the scope of transparency. Once again, we don't want operators to make decisions without considering the victims that they fall prey of these attacks, and then they cannot resolve this dispute. And this is taking shape within the scope of ICANN, outside the scope of ICANN, because let me underscore that responding to online abuse activities not only requires stakeholders like registrants or registrations, but also content-based platforms, social media, and all kinds of platforms available in the marketplace. In this regard, out of the talks and conversations that were held, we have to define of what is a DNS security threat. Anybody could have a different opinion on DNS security threats within the scope of ICANN. Let me tell you that there's a consensus being reached, or some guidelines to discuss these four categories or pillars, starting in the top quadrant to the left, that is called DNS security threats. Now, within the DNS security threats, we may speak of the 5 categories, such as malware, botnets, phishing, and pharming. and also as a vehicle to drive or to commit the other four security threats. To the right, we see a pattern of infrastructure abuse like service or denial of service, distributed denial of service, cache poisoning, protocol level attacks by queries to the resolvers, and the exploitation of implementation of vulnerabilities in the infrastructure. Now, in the lower left-hand corner quadrant, we have illegal or illicit content, like harmful content such as scam or fraud that probably is not that illegal, but in some way or another, it may become harmful to the users or to the victims that are the victims of this scam. Also, we have the illegal content. The definition of illegality will depend on the many jurisdictions and what is the legal framework that covers the scope of the legality. We can talk about the illegal sale of controlled substances. VeriSign, as a matter of fact, has provided collaboration with FDA, with the Food and Drug Administration, in order to respond to dedicated sites that become involved in the sale of controlled abuse substances. We also have relations with the Watt Foundation to work on issues related to sexual or pornography, child pornography. So these are the four categories or the four type of online abuse that we can classify as such, and depending on the type of abuse, one will require to identify who those players are, to act upon accordingly with the necessary, by filing the necessary reports, and see what kind of information or evidence is necessary for these players to respond and to mitigate before the circumstances, and sometimes remove the content that is harmful online. Let me try to explain that VeriSign is an operator that works with domain name servers, operating within the processes and policies made by ICANN, which is the regulatory coordinating agency of ISPs. ICANN has a very strong stance that is of preserving security, stability, and resilience of domain name servers, and the mission of which is critical, and it has its own limitations within its policies or rules. As it says in the slide, ICANN shall not regulate any content or services that use the internet on a domain name server. That is why these talks are important within the core of ICANN in order to manage and to respond to online abuse attacks, given the responsibility that ICANN has as the coordinating branch, as a registrant or registration agency. However, we do have other players in the internet ecosystem that require participation and involvement and the commitment of a multi-stakeholder approach to have a holistic approach, comprehensively covering the abuse issue that has its own history And we have taken a stance in order to make progress and to evolve, and I believe we're in the right direction. To conclude my remarks, let me go back to the same graph, and that is acknowledging that within the internet ecosystem, there are many factors and many drivers. Each player has a role and plays a key responsibility within the ecosystem, and together we can work comprehensively responding to these abuses that are attacking users online. Let me conclude my remarks, my presentation, and I'll be at your disposal to take any questions that you may have. Thank you, Dennis. Who are you interacting with at the national level that may be interested in working on these issues, like mitigating the abuse of DNSs? Because there are specialized agencies in cybersecurity and in cybercrime. However, on DNS abuse, who's going to be the right agency or the right key player at the national level to interact with and to help with mitigation efforts? That's a great question. At the national level, there may be different organizations. My experience tells me that at the national scope, there are CERC organizations or privately owned companies or non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that may help with the analysis, with the evidence, and with the reports on cybersecurity. Like in the United States, we have institutions at the national and regional level that they articulate a very good, effective communication channel. I don't know what is the case for Argentina, like the SERP channels, but I'm sure that there may be organizations that are fully involved with these efforts, providing information or statistics or data that may reveal what's going on at the infrastructure level, or providing necessary information or reports on phishing or scams or fraud. Any questions for Dennis? Dennis, we're about to go for lunch, and I believe that they want to break for lunch pretty soon. One more question. Apart from in the working special groups on ICANN on DNS abuse, how do you resort to information in other places? For example, once again, there are university majors on cybersecurity, workshops on cybersecurity and cybercrime. However, I don't see any information available apart from the one I see from the ICANN. In the GSD, for example, we have a DNS abuse workshop, and there are special talks that are open to the ICANN community. However, I don't see any information available on this topic. And I think as part of the internet infrastructure is important to connect it or to relate it to cybersecurity. Are there any other workshops or information in order to prevent this kind of attacks, the DNS attacks? Great question, Olga. And in ICANN, for example, if you want to pursue further information, not only on DNS, but at the content level, you may have the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network group. They are documenting and they are doing a great job with a special toolkit for reports, trusted notifiers. So it's a good channel, communication channel, to see how this information evolves. It's called the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network Group. Other spaces where we're going to have further information. In fact, October 25th, they're holding a webinar on botnets and malware. Is the ECHO Association with the top DNS initiative. So they're holding talks outside the scope of ICANN, since we require to involve many stakeholders. ICANN, for example, does not include social media, content hosting providers. I mean, these players are not within the scope of ICANN, so top DNS approach opens the forum to these stakeholders so they can learn how to respond to the attacks of botnets and malware. So this association is another group that you can resort to and pursue further information. Lastly, there's an anti-phishing working group. The anti-phishing working group follows closely anything that is connected with phishing by publishing reports on a regular basis. And they also organize working groups where you can be in touch on the latest topics with the latest information. Okay, we're going to communicate the information through Telegram. ECHO is the German Association of Internet Companies, right? Yes, correct. Thank you very much, Dennis. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. And we'll see you in an in-person meeting. And I would like to acknowledge VeriSign for your support and for your sponsorship.